There we go. Now we're live.
Now we're live.
Now we're live. Okay. And we start off very organically, just waiting for people, because occasionally people are late. Well, because they're all musicians, apparently.
Drummers.
They would not say that they were late. What they would say is that they're playing to the back of the beat. Yeah. And sometimes the back of the beat is 15 minutes late, 20 minutes, half an hour. Yeah. Completely different day. Anyway, okay. Welcome, everybody, to The Gear You Hear. This is Season 2, Episode 2. I am Emiko, and I'm sitting here with my co-host, Scott, the Pedal Guy. And before we introduce our extremely talented and illustrious guest who has a lot of really cool surprises in store for you all, we want to take a moment to give you some house rules and a little bit of background of how this podcast runs. So here we go. The first thing is, The Gear You Hear is technically an educational podcast. We focus a lot on music creation, music production, the technical aspects of it, but also the human side of what it is to be a career creator in today's music industry. Therefore, what that means is there's no trolling, there's no bullying, there's no talk of politics, there's no talk of religion, there's no sexual harassment or harassment of any kind. If you say something that is off color or ill-classed, then we will call you out, read out your comment, and boot you out immediately. This is a one strike you're out zone. However, that being said, if you have something nice to say or you're curious about something, please do feel free to type it in the comment section, and we will make sure that the questions get answered as best as they can. And please remember, there are no stupid questions. The Gear You Hear is open to people on their journey of music creation in all levels and all stages and all genres. And so what you know may be different from what someone else knows. So we encourage honest, valuable dialogue about that. And please don't feel ashamed or embarrassed if you have a beginner level question. We're all here to learn and we're all here to encourage. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Scott, the Pedal Guy, who's going to introduce our guest for today.
Well, hey, everybody. Good to see you. Welcome back, as always. And I am so very happy and excited to introduce our guest for today, who is guitarist and film composer Michael Brook. A lot of his there's my voice. A lot of his credits include most recently the Apple TV show Little America, which was quite a favorite of mine last year. So if you haven't seen it, you should definitely check it out. My first encounter of Michael's music cast your mind all the way back to the 90s, a darkened movie theater and a little movie called Heat, and where we heard Ultramarine for the first time, and pretty much blew my mind, and I became a fan of Michael's music as the years went on. And I reached out to Michael, and he was kind enough to answer on his website and agreed to an interview today. So thank you, Michael, for joining us today. I'm really looking forward to this conversation, and we'll go from there. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Miko, you want to kick it off?
I was going to say, Scott, do you want to start? No, I'll go first. That's fine. I'm actually really chomping at the bit. I'm chomping at the bit with this one because Michael, as we were talking pre the live button, from one film composer to another, obviously I work on keyboards, you work primarily on guitar. So I wanted to talk with our audience about the differences in what that's like for you, advantages, disadvantages, how you feel that your performance on your instrument affects the composition and the scoring process differently than those of us that compose linearly.
Well, I think guitar has more modes of expression than a keyboard, and more than MIDI generally. In MIDI, and say on a piano, you can say when you hit the note and how hard you hit it. Maybe there's a couple of other there's pedals, a few other things you can do in terms of dimensions of expression. And in guitar, which is not better, it's just different, you have things like how hard you hit the string, where you hit it. Are you slightly dampening it? Do you wiggle the note? All sorts of things, and many other things. You can play harmonics,
Sure.
and so on. So,
Whammy bar.
yep. So you inherently have, in general, a performance that just has more expression in it, and so that's good, I think, in a way for efficiently getting something emotional into a piece of music. And where you're at a disadvantage is maybe on what you might call the architectural side, that if you're trying to make a large composition, many layers, many parts, for other players like an orchestra or something, guitar is not as good at that kind of thing. And also, I think as a guitar player, I'm just not as good at thinking about that sort of thing. In general, I lean more towards the real-time aspect of I compose by improvising and then throw away the bad bits. And then I'll get some things, and then they will inspire adding to it and so on. But I think when you play a keyboard, I think just in general, keyboard players have a greater sense of harmonic structure, because they're playing a harmonic structure. And yes, you can play chords on a guitar, but it's not as big a thing as it is on keyboard.
Do you feel that MIDI guitar has improved or augmented advantages for you as a composer guitarist?
Big time. I've been using it since I think the IVL, the first sort of standalone guitar to MIDI thing.
Oh, blast from the past.
Yeah. And whatever the newest guitar to MIDI thing you have is always the best. And then you get another one, and you can't understand how you could use that crappy one that was great before. But I do think there's been a big breakthrough with what are they called? The triple play. Fishman.
Yeah. I've had a look at that one. It's pretty cool.
It's well, I've owned almost everything, and most of the guitar to MIDI converters, they require you to slightly learn a new instrument. You really have to adjust your technique. All sorts of either sloppy or expressive things that are just naturally part of guitar playing mess up the MIDI, and then you spend all day tidying it up. The Fishman is the first one I've played that doesn't create as much garbage, but also really has your touch translates. And most of the other ones, I always found it was so non-linear. You'd play something quiet and it'd be way too quiet. And I know you can adjust all that, but I never found anything that in the slightest got comfortable. But the Fishman is pretty darn good now. So, I mean, I've done piano parts that people really comment on the expressiveness of it. So it's good. And it's just also, as a guitar player and a completely incompetent keyboard player, I can I can go for something without having to translate it to a way of playing that is foreign to me. So it's really good. And they're not sponsoring me or anything, but I really think it's good. You have to set it up right. And I just dedicate a guitar to it, kind of.
Do you which guitar are you using for that? Are you using like a GK3 MIDI pickup, or is it going through a it's got its own pickup so you can just attach it to any guitar.
I'll show you.
Right. Yes, folks. That's one thing you get to see in this, is you get to actually see the studio. So this is a first for us.
All right. So
it's
a J Mascis Squire, which is an incredibly good guitar. Like, I mean, it's I have about 30 guitars or 40, and it's one of my favorites. And I use it all the time, even not for MIDI. But it's super cheap. So there's the pickup.
There you go.
There. And then there's the the electronics, which is wireless, which at first I was really thought was a dumb idea.
Mhm.
But if you're in a studio as a composer where you're playing and recording all the time, you're in a chair with wheels. And a big sort of ergonomic challenge for me was there was always bloody wires under my wheels, headphones, things like that. And so I think I have partially solved that, but I do appreciate now the wireless thing, and the battery lasts pretty long. But it's excellent. Like I would say, you, especially as if you worked at it, you could get performances that people just would not know it was MIDI.
That's excellent. That's excellent. I did use. I still have actually the first Yamaha MIDI guitar from the '80s, the one that every string was a high E string. I can't tell if that thing will still work or not, but I bought it from I think Gino Vanelli's brother or something back in the '90s.
Right.
Back when people used the recycler to buy used instruments and stuff. But about 10 years ago, a little over 10 years ago now, when I was working for Cakewalk and I was on the road doing sonar clinics and all that. I'm not a keyboard player at all. I'm horrible at keys, but love MIDI, love guitar. So I brought a Traveler acoustic guitar on the road with a GK3 MIDI pickup and a brain and all that stuff.
Okay.
And I got to tell you, when you get to Texas and places like that, you start playing like drum patterns and things on a low E string, it freaks people the hell out. Yeah. I think there's still something really magical about MIDI guitar that it's shrouded in mystery to a certain degree, because guitarists have always been kind of shy from technology until it stares them right in the face, where as long as it's something that's really simple and I can use like an iRig or whatever, then I'm in good shape. But what I've found, going back to say the first couple of records of yours, say Cobalt Blue,
which has MIDI guitar on it.
That actually was what I was going to ask, because when I hear cuts from that album like Breakdown, it sounds like you'd be using a looper, but this is 1992 and loopers weren't exactly out and about at that point.
No, I was using a looper.
You were using looper, okay.
Yeah, it was this English company, forgotten the name of it. It was one of the first loopers, but the key thing was it could be MIDI controlled. Before that, I was using the Electro Harmonix 16-second delay, which is still, a magic device because of the sound, but you couldn't sync it. But the English one, I'm blanking on the name, but I did use that. And then that was with the IVL using like the DX7 for some of those marimba or like buzzy marimba sounds. And it was, you had to practice so much to get it right.
Oh yeah, I can only imagine.
Especially live.
Yeah, there was a live album that accompanied that as well, right? From the from the Aquarium.
Yeah.
Right. It was some pretty cool stuff. I mean, back then it was really groundbreaking. And I think a person who's listening in 2021 may have some trouble understanding the amount of work that went into, composing a piece like that, or like say Ultramarine or Shona Bridge or something like that. And knowing the kind of work that has to actually go on behind the scenes to make something like that happen. Whereas now it's quite a bit simpler in some regards, as far as getting the idea down fast when you've got tools like Ableton Live and all that.
Yeah.
So my hat's off to you on really innovating at that time. So, and also to remind everybody who's watching, we get to actually see Michael's pedal board and his rig. So I think this would be a good time to segue over to that so people can see what you're using these days. Okay.
Let me try and change the camera here.
All right.
You do that and we will bounce out. Let's see here.
Yay, technology. Hey, how about that? Oh, well, that's me.
There we go. Okay, so there's my strikingly handsome feet. And so, well, we did, Scott, we talked about focusing on a pedal. So there's the Memory Man. That's an old one. That's actually where the piece Ultramarine came from. When I was playing with it and realized I didn't even musically understand it, that like a dotted eighth could give you a sort of syncopation and make your rhythm, well, make it sound like you're playing a lot more than you actually are. And I have an old one and a new one, and they're both great. The old one really has this mushy, kind of soft sound. And let me just, I know we weren't going to do much showing off, but it's one thing it does, it's cool, is you put a rubber surround on the pedal. And it's just, it's another form of expression by changing the delay time as you play. Then this is I gave up on the pedal board idea because I don't have much space in my studio. And my colleague, Craig Connard, said he was going vertical. So we tried this, and finding the right furniture was a real nightmare. And this table is actually my son's toy carpentry table, where they had like a vise on it and little wooden tools. But it's actually the best thing we could find. So do you want me to, can you guys talk to me, or am I broadcasting?
I can hear you.
Yeah. No, I just wanted to ask you a question. Do you want me just to quickly go through each pedal, or is that too much?
I'm down for it.
Okay. So
yeah, or if you want to go through the ones that you use most and your first go-tos.
Yeah,
either or both.
Well, that's something we were talking about earlier before the broadcast, that there isn't a go-to. It's like and that's why I slightly struggled with sort like what's a pedal we should focus on. Well, maybe the Memory Man, but that was a slightly arbitrary choice, because each one can bring some magic in the right situation. I'll just quickly race through them.
Yeah, go do it.
Yell at me to stop if you want. So there's a compressor, the Keeley one, which is pretty good. I still haven't found one I like. This old Yamaha Graphic EQ, which is great for sort of giving weird sounds. Then this old Korg OD1, which I used on Cobalt Blue, just a nice little overdrive. There's one of the deluxe big muffs, which is great for aggressive stuff. This super cheap Octafuzz, which I like. This is a pretty magic pedal, the white fuzz from Telex or some name like that. And they really, it does some beautifully weird sounds, kind of like a wah-wah pedal where you're not moving it. What else have we got? Then the Klon, the new, or the modern Klon, which I like a lot. The Electro-Harmonix Attack Decay, which is a super great pedal for making stuff not sound like guitar. And I sync it to my sequencer by feeding it a pulse. So you can have these great syncopated, synchronized guitar pulse effects, and it'll do backward sounds and all that. Ventris reverb, which I like a lot, often for sort of gigantic wall of sound things, not trying to sound like a real room. The Electro-Harmonix Pitchfork, which is quite remarkable. An old Sovtek Big Muff, which I think I'm going to take off. I just never got any magic from it. I don't know. I kept thinking I would. An original Sans amp, which still sounds great. Behringer Vibrato, the deluxe, the new Memory Man, which is great because you can sync it. The ventilator, it's like a Leslie simulator. It's pretty nice. And then the Strymon Timeline for digital echo. And then you can't see it, but I'm going to see if I can move the camera. So hold on to your horses. So down there, that's the sound sculpture, which switches all the pedals. And it's really good. It's super clean. It's my second one, actually. And it gives you, because for recording, I want a really clean signal, and it really helps. Super hi-fi. And then a slow reverb. And then that's all the infinite stuff. Let me see. Hold on, it's overloading. And a switcher for the Memory Man, the Memory Men. I think that's it. Oh, and over here there's a fuzz face because it has to be first, they say, for it to do its magic. And then, so this is my studio, and I record everything. I even listen to everything through the computer. So there's no, and I'm not using amps much, really. Well, not at all. I like them, but for film work, you have to be able to get back to stuff, I find. And so, like, I have a beautiful CS80 synthesizer that is my favorite synthesizer in the world. And it's actually really expressive because it has polyphonic aftertouch, but I'll record something and I like the performance, and then a month later the director will say, I love that, but can we just make it more blah? And it's like, well, no, I can't get back to it. And then there's a preamp and DIs and things like that. But I do actually, a tip for some of your if you're studio players. So I was saying how wires under your feet, and I think I found a solution, which is, can you see? Yeah, these things are like for people who want to have their keys on a belt, on a ring, and I attach that to the guitar cable, so it'll pull out, like if I move. Well, that's not supposed to be there, but anyway. But it doesn't stay under my chair, and that sounds trivial, but when you're working 14 hours a day, 7 days a week, it's amazing what helps or hinders your workflow. And for me, workflow is a super big thing. I'm going to switch back to the civilian camera.
That's our cue.
That was good that you it was just you on the screen there, because
Yeah.
I was drooling in the background a little bit there.
Yeah.
There was so many goodies.
Yeah, it's a good setup. And for example, speaking of workflow, so all the mics I might use, they're just on like a spring arm.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's
So-
brilliant.
And they're always plugged in, and because it's amazing how if you lose creative momentum, you lose the vibe, and all of a sudden you're trying to patch something, or where does this mic plug in, and all that kind of stuff. So I put a lot of effort into trying to make everything as ready to go as possible, and I think it has paid off.
That's fantastic. That's really the right way to do it. You know, I can definitely understand where you're coming from there. Mika, over to you.
Over to me.
I felt like I was monopolizing the conversation there for a minute.
Not at all.
Come
I've
on.
just been sitting there looking at Michael's studio, going, man, I gotta clean up my rooms.
Are you kidding? This room is disgusting.
Yeah,
This is low res.
You haven't seen our big space. You would just cry if you did. I actually have a couple of sound design, soundscaping questions for you in terms of forming sounds. How often have you found that you'll start with a sketch or a riff, right? I'm using the word sketch for you, obviously. And then you go, maybe you have a work print of something, I don't know, that's coming up, a scene or whatever. And you go and you think, okay, this is what I'm hearing. This is what I'm hearing. You go in and you do it. And it's completely wrong. And it's almost like tweak after tweak after tweak. Oh, if I change the sound, if I change the effect, maybe it'll help change the mood, maybe it'll bring it out. And then you go through everything. And then at the end, you just go back to what you had.
That does happen. But I just want to address one thing of the many things you just said. Many things you said there. I don't think about music. For me, it's almost always a pretty much real time thing. So, I might have a scene where I think, okay, maybe distorted guitar would be good, or something like that to that degree. But in terms of what the music would be, for me, composition is virtually completely it's a discovery process. It's like I'm an explorer or a geographer. And I'm not like an architect.
So do you, when you get so I don't, forgive me, because obviously everybody's process is different, but when you sign on for a film or for a show, you sit down and you meet with everybody first, but then you get your prints and you get your flow. Are you saying that you compose simultaneously? So you sit down, you run the work print, and you're just going, okay, I'm hearing this, I'm feeling this? Or is it the type of thing where you let it marinate and then you come back to it?
More the latter. Mostly when I hear about a project, even if it's not for sure, I will start sketching, because I sketch every day, and it's just to keep my fingers working. But also it's a way to develop ideas. Because I find creativity is a finite resource and you run out of it. But your schedule may demand more than you can do in that time period. So what I'll do is I'll start sketching, not thinking about scenes or characters or anything, just at the back of my mind with that project in my mind. And then when finally formal work starts, I'll have a bunch of ideas, and sometimes there are ideas that were done in that initial sketching process, and because I have, I don't know, like 3,500 sketches or something like that, some of which is on my website and isn't. We'll go through those, and some of those will, again, I will have been in a different state of mind when I did those sketches. Maybe they're a year or 10 years old, and it helps to widen the palette in a natural way, rather than saying, okay, now I got to get really aggressive and electronic-y and all that kind of thing. Whereas I may not be in that mode right now. So there's that, but also when you said about, do you ever go completely around the circuit and come back to the same thing? On Into the Wild, I had done a lot of sketches for that, and a lot of them ended up being in the temp score, and some of them were embarrassing. It was before, like, my room now is soundproofed and sound treated, but I didn't have that then, and so some of them you could hear somebody working on my neighbor's house hammering. And so
oh dear.
So I thought, okay, I'm going to tidy these up, or I made there are embarrassing mistakes, because again, I'm exploring. I don't know what I'm going to do, and often I make a mistake that just sounds like crap. So anyway, these roughs were in the temp, and Sean Penn was the director, and so I finished the pieces and I made them all proper. And he's like, "Can I hear the original ones?" And so I said, "Yeah, but they're really rough and all that." So we listened to that, and he said, "I like those better." So that's what went in the film for some of some of the score.
That's excellent.
Amazing.
Well, it's, you can, there's a sort of sense of our obligation to our craft to not have blatant mistakes, or like my timing's not very good, so I'll often fix that.
Mhm.
But also sometimes there's this, there's a sense of an overall wholeness about a real performance that sometimes is better, even with its flaws.
Right.
So how did the Little America project come along? That was actually a surprise show for me to really get into. If you haven't seen it, for those of you who may or may not have a Apple TV, it's a kind of a interesting bio series of sorts of different stories of little accomplishments across America, of different cultures and families, and really, I think, good stories that really make you think a little bit outside the box and realize that people really do have interesting stories that deviate from the norm, so to speak, and overcomings and adversities and all that fun stuff. But I found that your score really complemented a lot of that in different ways, because each story is completely different. There aren't like two stories that are alike, really. And so I imagine when you're scoring something like that, you probably had to, from episode to episode, think about a different theme or a different goal in mind, or a different motif.
Yeah, it was a scheduling challenge, because they scheduled it like a series, which it sort of is, but really it's 8 different movies. They're not connected, except for the fact that it's about that there's a kind of meta theme of people's experience in coming to America. And the thing I love about that show is that it's not the cliched struggle, overcome struggle, great success. It's much more nuanced than that. And so yeah, it was, in terms of the music, it was totally great, totally fine. Just the schedule was a bit crazy, because like doing a new 30-minute movie this week, and that has no connection to anything you've done before. But I came into it through one of the showrunners, Sean Heder, and I had worked with her on a film called Tallulah that she directed before, and it was great. I mean, why did the COVID have to happen to me? I mean, it's like we were going to do another season, but of course it's all based on people being able to go to locations. So they wanted to renew it, but it's got to be a year or year and a half before you can go anywhere, especially to some of the locations they went to. So who knows? But yeah, it is a gem, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Mika, have you seen it by any chance?
I have. I started to, and then I didn't finish.
It's worth a watch for sure.
It happens.
If you got a couple hours to kill.
I will have my mea culpa moment and say, unfortunately, I started a lot of things and then I didn't, because actually, Michael, the opposite happened to me, where all the non-location stuff started coming out of the woodwork, and people started going, oh, let's uncan the production that we canned and let's actually get things finished. So It's been, I'm going to binge watch this. I'm going to catch up. Nope, wait, I have to score this. I have to do a trailer for that. And it's literally just sitting, But I did want to ask you, actually, in terms of the COVID, and because as film scores, we do sit largely on our keysters. It's a very it's a physical endeavor in and of itself to sit that still, I think, for such a prolonged period of time. How have you used your time in terms of expanding your rig or augmenting your studio, or maybe integrating ideas that you've had that you didn't have time for before and now you do? Is there anything new that you've been putting in there, or anything old that you've been taking out?
Well, up until February 2020, the previous 3 years had just been, well, it's hard to imagine, but too busy. And,
Sure.
It's kind of be careful what you wish for.
Right.
Like I was just working too much, and, my back was getting injured and all that sort of kind of stuff. So when COVID started, it happened to coincide with just the end of a bunch of projects. So I thought, great, got a time to regroup, update some things, and so on. So actually, the whole pedal setup is new. That was done in March of 2020, and then I got a new computer, and I don't know if that much else has changed. I mean, for a while, I didn't really want to do I didn't want to be in the studio. But yeah, the whole pedal rig is completely new, and some of the pedals and some of them are just old favorites.
Mhm.
Well, as a keyboard player, I can tell you that I love seeing your pedals elevated, because that's how most of us use them, as hand crank devices, not
Well,
stop boxes.
I mean, even as a guitar player, there's a whole other thing you can do if you can get at the controls.
Right.
Absolutely.
So, with the Memory Man, with the rubber thing on the delay knob, and then I'm using the switcher, the Switchblade. I don't really change it that much in real time, it turns out. I thought I would, because I had one for a tour before, and I'd have all these presets and things like that, and it's unbelievably good. But it's turned out that it's just a very clean path, and when you turn something off, it's not in the path anymore. And I actually don't have any presets. I just turn, because usually for film stuff, I'll explore, get a sound, then I'll record it, and I'll try and document it somehow, and then just move on.
Right. I did want to ask you about your sound choices for film scoring. I have a buddy of mine who is also a composer, Charlie Clouser.
I know of him. Yeah,
he's great. He has a studio on the complex that his house is on, and this thing is like a warehouse of. You would think that you were going to a flea market garage sale of throwaway stuff.
Yeah.
And when I go pre-COVID, right, when I would go visit, and he'd say, "Oh, I picked up this great wheelbarrow the other day," and I'd go, "What's that for?" And I'm assuming it's to haul gear around. No. If I hit it with the hammer, it sounds like this. And I can get the resonance and the frequencies, and I can sample them and put them through this, and then run them through a ring modulator, and then ta-da! Here's the scene. That's my wheelbarrow. And I just went, what? What is happening? No, but it's really intense. Like, he takes that so seriously. So I'm just curious to know, you were talking about being on location. Do you ever find inspiration from either exotic sounds or run-of-the-mill things that may present themselves differently when you're traveling? And do you try to incorporate that either through sound design or sampling into any of your compositions and your scores?
Well, I don't really travel anymore. It's when I used to tour.
Right.
But since I've been doing pretty much nonstop film and TV work, I don't leave this room much. So actually, COVID didn't make that much difference to my lifestyle.
Right. Yeah.
I'm just kind of locked up. Some things like, I have this guitar. I'll get it. It's a resonator guitar, but it's kind of unusual. It's called a Pogriva. And it's this guy, Larry Pogriva, who doesn't make them anymore. But
goodness,
it's it's like it's aluminum.
I'm gonna bounce us out, Scott, just so that
and it looks like it's sort of a junkyard. It's got a hubcap for that's like a Dodge Lancer hubcap to cover the strings, the bridge. And I don't know if you can hear it, but there's kind of like a reverb on my voice. And then it does these kind of gong things. And it's just like if I play a note, I don't know if that was captured, but just that
Oh yeah.
the resonance there. Sometimes I'll just use elements like that, or I'll use it as a percussion instrument. But in terms of sort of junkyard stuff, I don't have really that much of that, but I do like just manipulating sounds a lot, which I do mostly in the computer, sometimes with a pedal, where it's not clear what the sound is.
Right.
And I think actually I just read an interview with Charlie Clouser where he said he likes to always, or as much as possible, start with a kind of organic element and then treat it. And he feels that has something that maybe a purely electronic source would not.
Yeah.
And I agree with that. If I'm sure people who are incredibly good at electronics can make things that are as good, but most of us don't really know how to do that. And so starting with something that has some acoustic properties, I think can be inspiring. And then you can, and also again, as part of the exploration process of, do I find something that creates some emotion in me, whether it's a sound or a part, is kind of, in my opinion, what it's all about. I think I'm at one end of the spectrum, and maybe Charlie is too, and then there's sort of the more, I'm going to write with a paper and pencil everything and then have people play it. And
Right. Yeah.
It's different horses for different courses.
Sure. Well, I mean, he always says that in the time it takes to electronically manipulate something to synthesize whatever the sound is, the end result, he said, I could just go out and bang the hammer on the wheelbarrow and the same amount of time that it takes to sample it and, do whatever he's doing is exactly what somebody would do if they started with the sample to get there anyway. And he said, so there's a humanness, I think, in film scoring that is required in some ways, like you said, different horses for different courses, but or the other way around.
I got it backwards. It's different courses
for different horses, right? It's like, wait a minute.
I'll have to remember that one. I've always gone to the old standby. It's different strokes for different blokes. So I'll have to remember that one. So I want to circle back to something you said earlier, because I was kind of fascinated with the you were talking about compression for a second there, and talking about you haven't found a compressor that you like yet. It seemed to me, listening to a lot of your tracks, that compression plays a pretty big role in the guitar, especially capturing that pluckiness that you're looking for in some of the clean tracks. So if you can recall, what was the trick to that? And the reason I'm asking is because, and this is a goal, on the Pedal Guide channel a lot, is to talk about how to actually use the products.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
People incorrectly use compressors every day, and it's just all the dynamics are gone when it's used ineffectively, but so many dynamics can be introduced when it's used the right way. And I think if you'd give me a little bit of, give our viewers a little bit of mindset on that, of what your mental picture is when you're working with compression, how it works in your setup there.
Well, I have probably two goals with compression for guitar, and one is that I forgot to show you. I invented this thing called the Infinite Guitar, which is like a sustainer thing, and it's really quiet. So I do have to compress the signal, And so there, I want extreme compression. And what did I used to use a DoD one, and that was pretty good. But what I found is when you have a very a lot of compression, a lot of gain, so far none of the ones I've used don't always let that first transient through. So there's like this click that takes your head off. And there's maybe you would know actually. There used to be a hardware device, it probably still exists, called the Transient Designer, made by SPL. And that uses a different mode of controlling dynamics. And so there is no attack. It's because the way the circuitry is designed. So it's kind of like a zero attack.
Sure.
And I have plugins that do that now, which are great, and I use them a lot. But I don't think a pedal does that I'm aware of.
No, I'm sure there. I know there are some really fancy compression units out there, and what I've come to find is that it's a challenge to transmit the message and the methodology of how to use it effectively to a point where somebody's going to, plunk down the money and buy it.
Yeah.
And that's half the challenge right there. Sometimes people just go for the easy button and just, okay, I'll just switch the saturation up to here and we'll just let it rep and see what happens. I vaguely remember that piece, that SPL piece, going back to when SPL used to make plugins for Steinberg, back when I was working at Steinberg, North America, long before Steinberg Yamaha or Steinberg Pinnacle or all the other iterations of Steinberg. I remember the de-esser in particular was a really good plugin that SPL made. And I think the thing about them is that they found a way to roll off the sibilants so well that it's almost like a look ahead. And maybe that's what we're referring to as more of a look ahead sort of feature to try to round off the initial attack of a compressor.
Well, the Transient Designer worked in a different way where it would take, there were two envelope, not to get too technical, but there were two envelope followers, a slow one and a fast one. And it would take the difference between those two and instantly get a control voltage. So traditional compressor designs, which are great, inherently have to have some time for them to respond. But this is kind of instantaneous. And there were like rack mount units to do it. And now SPL make a plugin, but I don't find it quite as good as the Sonox one. But I don't think there's a guitar pedal that does it. And it's a real problem. Like if you want that sort of, because the other use I find for a compressor is where you're playing pretty softly, and you want to hear all of the sustain and the decay of the note. And so like a Chris Isaak type sound, very clean.
Sure.
But where you hear the notes for a long time. And the standard pedals are pretty decent for that, I find. And the Keeley one, I think it's a pretty good one, but I've tried about 8 of them.
Yeah, Bob makes some really great pedals. I'm a big fan of the Keeley. The Keeley brand in particular. The Dark Side was the one that grabbed me the first time I tried that pedal out, because it's another pedal. It's going to emulate the Pink Floyd sound. Or is it really going to be there? And well, yeah, he nailed it, because it does sound. It does sound pretty damn good, actually, especially when you put it through the right guitars. Miko, you got something for us?
We actually have a question. An audience question.
We have an audience question.
Yeah, well, actually, I've been monitoring. So just Michael, if you see me going off over here, I'm not being rude or checking out. I'm answering people that are wanting to talk to you, which is great. So we have Casey, who has joined us on our Facebook page, who apparently loves your setup. This is very nice. We have Dean, who says the SPL Transient Designer is awesome. It's a great piece. Dean works with the prog band Yes, so There you go. Live music to the studio. Celine has a question. Where did it go? There it is. She said, which soundtrack took the longest to make? I'm going to add to that and say, and why? and let's cut out the whole, oh, the director was being difficult, or we had, technical production issues with the studio, yada, yada, yada. But in terms of, from a composition standpoint, which soundtrack do you feel took the longest and was the most laborious for you?
I don't really remember, but I know two that took a long time. One was called Juveniles, and a really, really cool film. And it was a first-time director who was great. And I think he just didn't know how the process worked, or because he hadn't done it before.
Right.
And so for him, it was sort of, let's just keep having fun. And it is fun, but it's also my job, and I have other things, to do. But that all worked out great. And then the other one was a film last year called Tiger Tail for Netflix, where the struggle with that was to make it simple enough. And the director had this amazing vision, and he was an incredibly good piano player. So he's a musician, and it took so long, like just, okay, these three notes, so we're going to try this and that, and it did make a difference.
Right.
And then the actual fundamental nature of the film changed. They reshot some stuff and things like that.
Right.
So that covered a long time span on the calendar, and it took up a fair bit of real time, but partly there were gaps.
Right.
And then sort of the challenges of finding, something. It was unusual that the challenge was to find the minimal thing that would do what was required.
Right. Yeah. Have you ever found that, I mean, I know different directors do things in different orders, and there are some that will give everything up, like you're involved from the beginning, and then there are others that will go, oh, I guess actually we should have this through composed score, so on and so forth. Have you ever had situations where you compose one version and you think, great, I'm good, I'm done, it's all signed off on, and then special effects come back and go, actually, and then you find yourself having to sort of recompose around things that have been added in later after the fact?
Not so much that. And I have many times I've tried when a film is going to have sound effects that are going to make an above average contribution.
Right.
I really try to get a dialogue going with the sound designer, and also kind of liaise with the editor or the director to say, why don't we don't have to commit, but let's make a plan. What's going to be front and center here? Is it going to be effects or score and that kind of thing? And actually on one IMAX film I did, I got to work with the sound designer a bit, and it's just so much better. But the reality is that on most of the time, the sound design is happening concurrently with the score. It's all last minute. And so the sound designers, they don't have time to bring a composer into the loop.
Yeah.
And so what happens is on a few things I've worked on, it's where the sound design has covered everything. And so then it's like, okay, what sound design are we going to throw out to make room for score? And maybe that's not a bad way to do it, in that you're safe, everything's covered,
Yeah.
I think maybe some directors find that approach a little. They would rather start with nothing and add things that
Yeah, right.
to see what works, rather than because it's a little counterintuitive, and maybe just different for different people,
Right.
or horses. It's a different way to do it, and they might want to start when everything is there and it sounds complete. They're
Right.
not sure about, well, what's the part that should go, or maybe there shouldn't be music, which
Well, so that was going to be my follow-up question is, do you ever find, especially when working with sound designers and effects, that like you might have, like in pre-production meetings, we talk a lot about, oh, there's going to be machine gun or an explosion or whatever. So, you know, the music should be X and the emotion is this, or this is what's happening. And so we need quick cuts and we need music to go with that or whatever. But then later you sit down with sound design and they pose the question, well, so there's a few different types of explosions that we can make happen, but what's the music going to be like? And then you say, well, what type of music would you like for the explosion that you have designed? Right?
Yeah.
Because there's also frequency issues that one has to sit either beneath or beside another. So how do you find yourself working out those mini challenges, which can actually be quite, you know, large in the grand scheme of how the film is presented in terms of the emotional impact it has on the audience?
Well, you know, composers, like all people in media, to a certain degree, get typecast and tend to work within a certain territory or genre or whatever. And I'm actually trying to think if I've ever worked on a film that had an explosion in it.
Oh, fair enough.
Well,
Yeah,
take,
fair enough.
take for
Okay.
example, maybe The Fighter, right? Because The Fighter had boxing scenes, and
That's
Yeah.
true, right? So not just necessarily fire explosions, but anything combative.
Well, then it's yeah, and then it was or a film I did, just one of the last things I did in 2020, called Embattled, and that had fights in it too. And there was actually, now that I think about it, Emiko, there's something that that reminded me. There was a scene where I think there were maybe 5 different fights in it.
Mhm.
And they said, okay, well, this fight's going to be, we want score to be really big here. This one, it's going to be more effects and all that kind of thing. And there was a last minute thing from at the dub stage. We've decided we want to not have the effects in this fight, which I hadn't done any score for. Can you do something at the last minute?
Right.
So that kind of thing happens, but in general, there's less planning and discussion about that than I would have hoped for. Just in general, and it's because everybody's overloaded, you know.
Right. That's true. That's true. And with that, we are almost at 60 minutes. So Scott, do you
Wow.
have this one went by really quickly. This was
Yeah,
great.
yeah.
Do you have a final question or two, or?
actually, no, I'm pretty happy with everything here. This has been a great interview, because not only have we gotten to get into your brain there a little bit, but also see what's behind you there in the studio and getting a little tour, and that's a first for this channel and for the series. So thank you for extending your that courtesy to us. I appreciate it very much.
Sure.
Yes,
I have a
and
question for Scott.
Sure.
Why are there so many fuzz boxes? I don't get it. How? Like, there's got to be 1,000 or more, right?
Well, you may not see. Well,
I
actually,
love
you can't see because we're off camera here. But there's a bloody stump in the wall right here for me banging my head against it all the time, going, "Why is there another distortion pedal?" Because we don't need I needed one, like I need a hole in the head.
I don't get it.
I don't either. And look, I just think that sometimes it can be a marketing tool. Sometimes it can be a sometimes it can be an actual innovation. But there are so many fuzzes. Like I'll take one for example, just very briefly here, like Deep Trip pedals out of Brazil. One of my favorite brands, and whenever I bring their stuff in, it's pretty much already gone. But Do has made an amazing attempt to actually model out well-known fuzzes over the years. So like tone benders and fuzz faces, and he has one called the Bog, which stands for Band of Gypsies, which is fashioned after Hendrix. And I would say that pedal probably comes closer than the Dunlop fuzz, because I saw the fuzz there in the background there when we were doing the tour. It's utterly amazing. But the thing is I think to your point earlier about that vibe, when you find a vibe, that's you got to keep going down that road as fast as possible. And I think that sometimes that's what happens with the overdrives and distortions, because no overdrives or distortions are quite the same really at times, but there are so many of them. To my right here, I have the Headrush pedal board, because I'm in the process of shooting a whole bunch of new content for it now, because hint, there's a new firmware coming, but you didn't hear that here. There are some new effects, and I can't name what they are exactly, but there are some new overdrives that are like version 2s of some of the overdrives that were already there. And it's kind of fascinating, because I'm listening to it going, oh, it couldn't be that different. Why go to all the trouble of having 2 modules, a version 1 and a version 2 in the same unit? Why not just have one unit? And lo and behold, they sound remarkably different.
And good, I mean, usably different.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. They're just very, very usable. I think, but I find sometimes that it's the fun of working with overdrives in particular, that you could put them before and after delays to achieve different textures. It's all about finding that magic combination. And so, well, yes, I agree. There are far too many overdrives out there, and distortions and fuzzes. People just are always looking for more, and it's absolutely been reflected in 2020 as far as my business has gone, because I've honestly never been so busy in my life. I'm at the post office and FedEx every day shipping off product, because people are home and they need to have a creative outlet, and thankfully they're all doing it through music. So happy to support that in any way that I can. And I've moved a distortion pedal or two since the beginning of the pandemic, for sure.
Well, it's interesting that you're asking about that, Michael, because as a keyboard player, any chance, I don't notice that there are so many, actually, because there are a bunch that I use and they all serve different purposes. And I don't know if that's perhaps because it affects my original tone differently each time. So for me, it's always about being not a guitar. I'm so not a guitar player to the point that I have a keytar. That's how non-guitar player I am. But again, those pedals, each and every one makes a complete different difference to this rig. So it's interesting to hear a guitar player say, why are there so many? Where I'm going, I need more.
Well, no. I mean, I get that lots of pedals are different, and each one brings something different to the table. But it's more, can there be any gaps left and any niches? Because there are so many. And I don't even know where you start. Like, how do you? There must be X number of clones of all the famous fuzzes.
Well, right, yeah.
And so, okay, so there's 20 tone benders, and
right,
or whatever. And it's hard. Well, same with it's hard to imagine that that's a viable business. Same with when you go to NAMM, you see, how many Strat copies can there be? I mean, I'm not complaining. I'm puzzled that would be a viable business to do that. But it must be, because they keep doing it.
That it is. But it's always about the marketing. It's always about the message. I'll give you a great example. And it's not a distortion pedal, but it's this is an audio IO that I recently picked up last year, and here, I'll hold up to the camera here a little bit closer. This is the Axe IO from IK Multimedia.
Yeah.
And so this was IK Multimedia's like first attempt to really go legit with their audio interfaces, because they're known obviously for being the iRig company and coming up with that. And I remember when they showed that to me years and years ago, back when I was working at working as a buyer for that other chain store out there. And they showed me the new product, and I thought, hey, that's great. And I never thought that the iRig would blow up like it did. But the thing here is that what makes this special for guitar players is this Z-tone function, which is right here at the top. This is a JFET transformer specifically made for really honing in the guitar sound. And it's the thing that actually stood apart for me in listening to it, because all of a sudden I could actually get an actual really great guitar sound just from plugging in, which is quite a challenge, because most audio interfaces will roll off different frequencies, can't handle every frequency range, and don't really give you any sort of customization. And it was the thing that drove it, that really made that product stand apart from the rest of the bazillion audio interfaces that are out there. Having been responsible for unleashing some of those nightmares on people, it was refreshing to find something that has been something that's been quite a unique proposition. But that's one of those things, like, it's a minor innovation to some, but to those select people, it's a major innovation. And sometimes that happens with overdrives and all of that. In particular, like you were mentioning Klon earlier. Klon was a really big deal. The Klon emulations have been a really big deal for the last couple of years, because it was a very distinct sound, a very unique sound. And if you were able to actually find a Klon on the market, you're shelling out $2,500 to $3,000 easily for the real deal. And then this company called NuX came out with one that has the silver and the gold edition. It sounds convincingly very close, and it's $69. So it's like, it's sign of the times. There is so much retro history besides Big Muffs and some of the other standbys that have not been explored enough. And I think a lot of those are coming to light now. In other categories as well, like delay pedals, there's a really big re-emphasis on dual delays now, and really emulating tape echoes to a point where it sounds convincingly close to the original deal. So the train is going to keep going. It's already left the station, and it just keeps going throughout popular culture. And if it finds its way on a Billie Eilish record, everybody's going to want it. So I'm just trying to think of somebody popular. Sorry, that would spur the moment where people are going to hear it and then want to have it, like Auto-Tune, for example. That went away out of fashion after the second time around, and I'm sure it's at this point now it's probably due for another resurgence of somebody to do something wanky with the Auto-Tune, and then all of a sudden people are going to want that effect again. So it's all cyclical, and
I guess I want a curator to condense this tsunami of information of these different. I mean, fuzzes are just an example, but maybe that's what you do. I don't know.
To a certain degree.
Yeah.
To a certain degree. I think the second you start doing videos and how to do this or how to do that, one thing I've learned over the last 4+ years is just the web is out there and everybody's got an opinion. And sometimes they will share it with you happily. Sometimes they will share it with you not so happily. And be rather critical and nasty. But that's just the way it is. I did a video last week where I showed people how to sound like Metallica. And I was sweating bullets all the way to the end on that one, just because the second you go into that genre and you start talking to that community, they are so aggressive. And if, God forbid, you should get one of the sounds wrong or one of the notes wrong, they'll tear you a new one. And thankfully, nobody's done that yet. It's been rather well received. So maybe it was using my awesome Explorer here that legitimized my playing on that, even though I can't play those riffs like I used to. So it's always a challenge. But yeah, that's the curation. I think itself would be actually quite an interesting career choice for someone, because it is like there are like pieces of art when you think about it sometimes.
Yeah.
And what they've done for popular music.
Right, that's true. And speaking of negative feedback and positive feedback on the web, we will end with the fact that there's a lot of great compliments, Michael, to you. We have somebody who's saying that Affliction is one of their favorite soundtracks. Somebody else said they love the where did it go? The album with I don't want to butcher his name. Is it Peter Newton? Is that how you say it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That's a great record. And I really recommend people. It's called Sleeps with the Fishes or Sleep with Fishes. Yeah, that was a magic moment. That's really
well. He took time to write in about that. Somebody else wrote, MB is a master mood player. So
there you go.
You're getting a lot of love today, and that's awesome. And with that, we thank you so very much for being here. And here Claude has just shown up and said, thanks for being there, and thank you for such a great interview. And he echoed our sentiments perfectly.
Oh, so, total pleasure and great to talk to you both.
Ditto. Thanks so much.
Michael Brook, thank you so much. Everybody, we're going to post Michael's links so you can go check out more of his music. Check out his sketches page on his website because it's very cool.
You can download them too.
Yeah. That was to me that was the most surprising part. But anyway, thank you everybody for joining us. Stay tuned. We are bi-weekly, so not next week, but the week after we will be back, and we will be announcing our guest next week, actually. But stay tuned because we've got a very cool lineup for season 2, including Michael Brook. Michael, thank you so much for joining us today on The Gear You Hear.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Take care.
Excellent.
See you, everybody.